You can't do that. Hear this and other value bombs in this authentic interview with the co-founder and managing director for Startup Virginia, Bryan BOSTIC. It's time to be an authentic leader. I was introduced to Bryan through a colleague. Thank you, Natalie. We immediately connected in this initial meeting, and we both agreed that this is an interview that simply had to happen. In every encounter that I've had with Bryan BOSTIC before and even after this interview, it is clear that Bryan is truly an authentic leader. And I think it really comes out beautifully in this interview. Our conversation that day was effortless, which even made it more clear about why this interview had to happen. In this interview, you're going to hear some amazing stories from Bryan's professional career. He also shares his mission to make Richmond, Virginia a hub for startups in the United States. This interview takes place just before the 1717 Innovation Center opened in January of 2018. I've had an opportunity to go down there several times since then, and it is truly state-of-the-art. If you have an opportunity to be in Richmond and go visit, I highly recommend it. Some of the topics that are covered during this interview is, you can actually hear about how the cartoon Beetle Bailey helped launch Bryan's first major startup. I also asked him about the surprises of owning Smartbox. You've probably heard of Smartbox. He was once an owner of Smartbox. He's also very involved in the baseball stadium in downtown. How did Startup Virginia, start up? I love that question. And then what is passion and how do you know when somebody has it? Bryan has a very interesting perspective, especially given his career history, to be able to talk to that. Make sure you come back after the interview at the end of this video where you'll hear some of the key takeaways that I had during the interview. I'd love to know what you think. I've got at least 4 hours worth of material here to ask you about.
It'll be a long day.
We're not going to get through all of those. Before we get started, anything you'd like to say just before we even start at all?
Well, I want to thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. It's a great opportunity to get to chat with you. I was told I'm going to get grilled. I expect that from Chris. We had a really fun time when we got together, so I told him, sky's the limit, whatever you want, I'll do my best to answer it. I don't hold back, as those who know me in the room, I'm not afraid to speak my piece.
Yeah, good.
Right or wrong.
Well, it was like that when we met the last 2 times, so that's good. So, as I mentioned, Bryan is the executive director and co-founder, really, of Startup Virginia. And you actually have a new building that's being constructed downtown, is that right?
We do. We're in a wonderful situation. Startup Virginia is a high-growth incubator that came about from a group of entrepreneurs, Will Loving, Brad Cummings, and myself, who had been working in the ecosystem in innovation and entrepreneurship and saw 2 really huge gaps. One of which was we did not have a front door. We had no central place where entrepreneurs could channel their ideation and their opportunities. And second, they had a really hard time finding capital, seed capital. So those 2 things were instrumental in defining what we were going to do about something our community was lacking. And if you've been to some of these other cities, Nashville in particular is a great city for this, we don't have what they have, and we need to compete. So we need to do something about it. We certainly didn't believe that government was the answer. That's not what entrepreneurs believe. So we felt the right thing to do was to solve the problem, so we put our own resources into getting this going. And the beauty of that effort is Capital One thought that was a unique problem to be solved and an opportunity for them to participate, and they really have this Future Edge initiative where they are setting out in the communities that they serve to spend $150 million. And they took a little channel of that and pushed it our way and bought a building in Chaco Bottom, an old tobacco warehouse, and they're renovating it. And we'll move in January. Really exciting times. It's a great community asset, and you'll see what I mean here very shortly.
Yeah, good. Well, I've had fun following you on Instagram as well. Actually, Startup Virginia specifically, because you've been showing kind of the construction process as you've been going along. So,
how's it look?
It looks, well, from my standpoint, it looks terrific. I'm actually looking forward to coming down and seeing that in person when it's all done.
The mayor was in on Wednesday and he loved it. So,
Is that right?
So
Oh, well, there you go.
We're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, that is good. I did see that actually on there. So good. So a little bit more about Bryan. He really is what I would describe as a serial entrepreneur. You know this entrepreneurial space. You sold B2 Technology.
2B.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I have it written 2B, and I just read it wrong. And sold that to Ticketmaster. I mean, has anybody heard of Ticketmaster before? I did hear that.
Small little group.
Yeah, I think they're going to be a success. So how did you get into that business? And maybe tell us a little bit more about what 2B is.
Yeah, well, 2B Technology was a playoff on versions of software and my initials. And
Oh, I like that.
where did that come from? That's where it came from. But what I was seeking to do was make a difference. The internet was nowhere to be found. This was all pure PC-related software and general networking from Novell and Microsoft and others. But companies were seeing that they could afford a PC and afford the ability to truly get into data processing that did not exist in an affordable way. So what I wanted to do was find a product, a niche that I could market on my own. It took 7 years to actually find that product, working with lots of different clients, building different applications with a team of developers. And ironically, I hated computers in college.
So really?
it's rather strange. But I knew if I didn't know how to leverage that technology, I'd be lost.
Yeah.
So I just felt like there was a unique opportunity to take this powerful resource and deploy it in a way that helped others do their job better, quicker, faster. And if it worked, it'd be a really, really great business to have. So we came across a product opportunity around reservations and scheduling. And to kind of bucketize that, I went and met with Jamestown, and they pulled out this calendar book. And it was a disaster. It had whiteout and had sticky notes, and it was rather funny. And I took those questions and I went to similar institutions and said, how do you solve this problem? And they all said the exact same thing. They all pulled out the calendar book and it was a wreck. But I asked them one question at the end. I said, how are you different than this other organization? And they said, we're completely different. And they were exactly the same. So that was kind of the trigger for me to take this opportunity and create a platform from which to build on. And so the reservation scheduling was just an engine, and we ended up adding ticketing services to that with, that's another fun story. Any Beetle Bailey fans in here? Have you ever heard of Beetle Bailey?
Of course, yeah.
Okay. So Mort Walker, really, really nice man who created Beetle Bailey. He wanted to create a cartoon art museum in Boca Raton, Florida with Charles Schultz and some Disney folks. And so I went down and they had all this going on, and make a long story really short. They implemented our software and our services, and he started panicking. About how am I going to handle these tens of thousands of people coming through my door at opening. And I said, well, don't worry, we can handle that for you, Mort.
Of course
you
can.
You can? I was like, absolutely. We'd never done that before. But I knew how to do it. And I knew we had the platform to do it. So my only fear in that process was, of all things, getting the lease lines into the building in a timely fashion, because that usually was taking about 2 months to have happen, and I really only had 3 weeks to make that happen. So we made a couple of calls, got some friends to make some calls, and we got them installed, and ended up opening that division of our business on the backs of the Cartoon Art Museum, and it became a really great business to compete against Ticketmaster.
Wow. So is that really kind of the catalyst that jumped you to the next level?
It was. You know, the museum and visitor attraction market, and we became the industry standard in museums, zoos, aquariums around the world, from right here in little old Richmond. But mid-tier museums found out that they could put on blockbuster exhibits throughout the late 90s and compete against the Met, and the Art Institute Chicago and the Getty, by putting on these, they can get a corporate sponsor, they could put on these 8, 9, 10-week exhibits and basically do enough business in that amount of time that the rest of the year was gravy for them.
Really? Wow.
But they had no platform to do that. And ultimately for us, we competed against Ticketmaster where these contracts would come up, and Ticketmaster was inflexible. They were great at selling tickets to sporting events, like this. They could sell tens of thousands of tickets in minutes. Well, we weren't about that. This was a longer period of time. This was about providing a service. And so that's exactly how we approach the business model of dealing with those kinds of ticketed events. Let's upsell and let's create a whole nother opportunity for that entity. And Ticketmaster couldn't do that. And so whenever we competed against them directly, we won every single time. So it was a lot of fun. It was a great experience, great team of people. And I've had some personal experiences from that really were, if you like Monet, and I love Monet, I did a exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum of Art with 53 Monet paintings, 7 of which had never been seen in the world before. And the day before it opened, I was up there with their team, and they said, well, just go on in. Take your time.
You knew who they were speaking with at the time?
The door closed behind me. I'm in a room by myself with 53 Monet paintings. Now, that might not move you, but it moved me.
Oh, yeah.
It moved me. It was powerful, really powerful. No security. Typically they have the bars, you can't get anywhere near it. I was within inches from it. I knew not to touch them, of course, but just fascinating to be able to see and experience something like that. So I've had some real fun times doing that.
Man, I don't have any stories like that, but I look forward to having those someday. Which actually, I got caught up in something you said early on in the first part of your answer, is that I think you said it took you 7 years to really kind of find your niche. So for those of us who are still relatively early in their business, and I've been doing what I do specifically here in Richmond for a little over 3 years-ish or so, how did you know over those 7 years and have the faith that it was going to become something, worth having? Yeah,
well, for one, I had a lot of confidence that what I was doing would have bigger opportunities, because what we were doing were changing people's lives. I just hadn't found the one that really changed mine. And so if you're making a difference in other people's lives along the way, everything's pretty good. But I really wanted one that I could truly focus on and market on my own and make a difference in my world. And my world was helping others, but at the same time you kind of have a passion to take something that's truly your own, make it your own, and see where you can go with it.
Terrific. Okay, well, good. Well, thank you for that answer. You also were involved in this other company maybe you may have heard of called Smartbox. And not only did you have that, you acquired it and then ultimately ended up selling that. What can you tell us about that? Or really, what I'd really be more interested to know is, what was the really biggest surprise for you in owning Smartbox?
Yeah, how many of y'all use Smartbox? Thank you very much. Corey, and we had a partnership going, so that was great. And Natalie, thank you. She did some great marketing services. Workforce was really great for branding as well. That was an acquisition I made when the founders of that company, I did not found it, I bought it. It was a concept here in Richmond, founded here in Richmond. And they came and said, would you like to invest? And I looked at the business model, and at that time, this was 2004, Pods was really making a huge growth mode across the country, but nobody was following them. There was no fast follower to what they were doing. I felt, well, maybe there's an opportunity here if we can differentiate the business model enough from what they're doing to become a fast follower. And so to make from a business standpoint, they said, well, why don't you make an investment? And I said, well, why aren't you making an additional investment as the founder? And that told me everything with what his response was. I won't go into what his response was, but at the end of the day, I said, well, if we're going to take risk and it's going to be on my checkbook, then I'll just own the company versus just making an investment. So I bought the company.
Well, sometimes it takes the good question, right? And knowing the right question to ask
Yeah,
to uncover something you wouldn't otherwise.
and that was really about risk and risk management. And if I'm going to take that risk versus them taking the risk or shared risk, there's certainly different pathways that you can take. But I felt like it was being shifted on me from the line of questioning.
Yeah.
So if that's going to happen, then
Yeah.
I'm just going to cut a deal that's in, my family's best interest if I'm going to have all the risk. And so that's what I did. That was based here in Richmond, and we then franchised it out across the country. Went through a rather hellacious time with the recession. SmartBox and all those businesses are very tied to the housing market. And the housing market, I don't know who's in housing here, but it is still not recovered. It's really amazing if you look at the charts of it. Last year at this time, if you track the last, every recession except the Great Depression and this past one, the housing market, housing starts, is still at the bottom of the worst one.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. From a number standpoint. So there's lots of room to grow there. But it's a really great business. I sold it to Dunmar Moving. They were the Allied representative here in town, and Allied bought the franchisor from me in 2000. Gosh, now I can't even remember.
2000 something.
2014.
There you go.
Yeah. So, but it literally took, from a patient standpoint, in 2009, I had to take over the business from an operational standpoint. It's not what I wanted to do. I had no intention of running it day to day, but the world had changed. And, I'm a firm believer that when you have franchisees buy into your system, they're your partner. They are your partner. And you've got to treat them as a partner, not just treat them as, a customer, because they really are both. But at the end of the day, when the world is tanking, you can't throw them under the bus.
Right.
You've got to prove to them that you're there for the long haul and to help them as a partner. So on September 1st of 2009, I came in and I cut their royalties immediately 20%. I told them that they didn't have to pay their marketing fee anymore, but I would up the marketing fee out of my own wallet.
Wow.
And centralize services so that they could drop their head count at their local level so that they could become a stronger organization and have more opportunities to grow and not so much grow at the time, but see it through, because who knew how long it was going to take. And so that was our focus. We consolidated services, put in new technology, and made an investment in the company that proved to them that we were committed to helping them survive this, because in a franchise system, you're nothing without your franchisees. And I'm not so sure that management at the time felt that, but I did. And so change had to take place.
As you talk about the decisions that you made at that time and told your franchisees exactly what I'm going to do, I hear a lot of confidence in what you said there. Like, how did you have that level of confidence? I mean, how did you know that was what needed to happen and what you needed to do?
Well, I'm a believer you got to communicate.
Yeah.
So if you're not going to communicate with people that really impact your day-to-day business, you're not going to get very far. So I felt like, one, being honest, being straightforward, being upfront with them was everything. Look, we were all going through the nightmare together.
Right.
It's not like it was just them.
Right.
And it wasn't just us. We were all dealing with horrendous, challenging times that had no end in sight. And access to capital was zero. And there was no way to get any money. And those franchisees were hanging on a vine because that business was all, I call them boxes in the barn. If you were just getting out of the gate and you didn't have a lot of boxes in the barn, storage units in the warehouse, you were really in trouble. And so how can you help them get over that hurdle? So we tried everything we possibly could do to help them get through it. And not all of them did. I bought back 5 of them, which was challenging. And in some cases with some people I loved. I mean, really close friends. And they had real challenging times that affected their life. And that's, when times are tough, I don't think you throw people to the curb. You don't kick them to the curb. You sit down and you go, how can we get through this together? And you find your best way to deal with it.
Right. Wow. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. So You're described as an investor, a mentor. You're involved in over 20 companies. Troublemaker, which is good. I didn't have it written here, but okay, we'll call you a troublemaker. You also do speaking on logistics and software. I actually had to look up UI and UX. It feels like I should have known that. And after I looked it up, I realized it's user interface and user experience.
Exactly.
Also franchising, strategic opportunities, all those sorts of, so you're involved in all kinds of very professional business related things. But I really would like to know a little bit more about your story and connection to why you got involved in this baseball stadium project. You did say I could ask you anything.
Oh yeah, I'm totally good with it. And it's a huge part of my life.
Right.
For many reasons, and there are some components to that. I'm sure you followed it. It was a 12-year saga, and it's still a saga. But it's very political, and it has all kinds of other ramifications to it. But the ultimate question came about in 2002. The diamond lost a huge chunk of concrete out of its ceiling. Didn't hurt anybody, but what if? And so the question became, is that a facility that's fit for the future? And in reality, it was one of the last what's called vertical stadiums built in America.
Really?
Yeah. Stadiums today are built around a ballpark versus vertically behind it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that is strictly a first base, third base facility.
Yeah.
You know, the concourse is terrible. You can't see the game. All the other facilities are built now. If you go get a Coke or a beer or a hot dog, you can still see what's going on. You can't do that there. So you also couldn't have groups of any scale where they could congregate. There was no place to do that. And because it was a concrete structure, it was very difficult to create one. So the question became, if we're going to spend any money as a community, what's the best way to spend money? And so the studies proved that if you're gonna do that, then make it a revitalization effort. Don't make it about a ballpark. But I guarantee everybody in here thinks it was about a ballpark.
Right.
And that's because the newspaper, that's all they wanted to write about was a ballpark. It was about revitalization, it was about tax generation and creating new opportunities. And if you look at the studies around the country for peer group cities, really important, peer group cities, they said we're not talking about Boston, we're not talking about
Right.
LA, talking about peer group type cities that are in the 30 to 70 MSA. Every one of them, virtually every one of them, built their ballparks downtown. And they leveraged them as catalysts for growth. So why would we think that that's a stupid idea if they are all doing it? Maybe there's something to this. So I hired a group out of Memphis called Looney, Ricks, and Kiss, which is a development group that specializes engineering-wise, structure-wise, planning-wise in doing analysis of communities. And I said, come to our great city. I'm not going to tell you where it should go. Our team's not going to tell you where it should go. You tell us where it should go. And so here's the answer. They said not only was Shockoe Bottom the best location for our community, it's the best one they'd ever seen in America.
Really?
Because they have these checklists of things
yeah.
which are taking existing infrastructure and leveraging it, like parking decks, access points to interstates, urban districts, things where you can shop and restaurants and that stuff. So we thought that was pretty powerful, coming from one of the top groups in the country. So that's what happened. But you might be wondering, why did I get involved in that? And here's really the answer to the bigger question. And here's the difference between today and a long time ago. In 1952, the mayor of Richmond called my grandfather and said, hey, we have an opportunity to have AAA baseball in Richmond, but we don't have a facility. Will you build it? Will you be our community liaison? Will you be the person who champions this cause and makes this happen? Now, my grandfather was a really great man, loved him dearly, just didn't live long enough, sadly. He didn't know anything about baseball, but he cared about his community deeply. Very active, engaged individual in the political world, in the community world, active in gobs of different boards. And a friend of mine knew this story of what my grandfather did, and he raised $356,000
Whoa.
and built Parker Field. And to tell you how important that was and what his role was, his seats then are the governor's seats today.
Wow.
They had the row right beside the dugout.
Wow.
So he was a champion of all things Richmond, big community guy. And so a friend of mine said, well, look, why don't you consider doing something similar in this case? We got a problem. You got this history. So that's how I got involved with tackling this ridiculous project. This opportunity to create change. And that's really what it was about. It still is. It still is. We haven't solved the problem. Problem is not solved. Team is here. That's another story. And at the end of the day, it's all about entertainment in minor league sports.
Right.
It has nothing. 70% of the people that go to minor league sports games have no idea who's winning or losing and don't care.
Right.
They just don't care.
They want to have fun.
They want to have fun with their family.
Yeah.
And I'm completely convinced that baseball, minor league baseball, is the single greatest family entertainment that you can participate in. Where else can you go and have basically 18 breaks, half innings and half innings, 18 breaks where you can sit and talk to your kids and your wife and your spouse.
Yeah. And something
It's
fun and
powerful.
entertaining happens at each one of those breaks as
Yeah.
well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's terrific. So I want to move on, shift a little bit. I love this question. How did Startup Virginia, start up?
We saw a gap. We saw a problem in the
Yeah.
ecosystem. I've been involved with many different startup organizations, entrepreneur organizations. I've been involved with universities doing mentoring with startups there. And typically a startup comes out of a university and they go, well, mom and dad says I got to get a job. And so that idea typically goes on the shelf. And we can't have that. So that's one. We have a phenomenal opportunity in Richmond. The accolades, the beer, the food, the entertainment, the river, the people. This is a great community, and the rest of the country and the rest of the world are taking note. And we're getting all these things written about us that are really positive. Not the least of which is we're the #2 millennial growth town in America right now. How many knew that?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really a powerful message, but you cannot keep that if you don't have things, if you don't have employment for them. They have to have employment. And if you don't have a vibrant entrepreneurial community, they follow these things. They'll also follow the beer. That's very, very true.
Right.
And we have a fantastic beer community.
Plenty of that,
fantastic beer community. So we felt something had to be done about it. There were plenty of incubators from a what we call Main Street standpoint. Main Street business is, in essence, a one-off business. They're not looking to be a truly scalable business or go on a regional, national, or global scale. We call those high growth.
Yeah.
So in order to compete from a peer group standpoint, we have to have an incubator. You also have to have an accelerator. Who's familiar with Lighthouse Labs? Great. So Lighthouse Labs is a 5-year-old accelerator program that's one of the top 25 global accelerator network entities in America. So that is really, really powerful. So we have that component, but they only do a small number of companies. So how are we going to leverage what they're doing from an accelerator standpoint? Well, we need an incubator to tie it to that, in essence, is a year-round engine for new companies. So we decided to do something about it and create it ourselves. And our goal, quite simply, is to have, over the next 3 years, 200 high-growth companies get created right here in Richmond.
Wow. I think I've heard you describe, you're looking for Richmond to be a hub for new businesses.
We are. We'd like for Richmond to be a top 10 city for innovation and entrepreneurship. We have a biotech park, and that's great, but that's typically for life sciences and health sciences. Entrepreneurship can be anything today. doesn't have to just be about some pure play business or pure play tech. It can be any combination of those things. But where do they go? All these companies have a band of need. They're all the same. Now, once they move beyond that, that's a different game. But the general, I'm going to start up a business, I need help. There's a band of activities, programs, educational opportunities that they just have to have because they don't teach that in school.
Right.
And we have some incredibly bright, young, energetic, ideating people here. And we have a ripe community for growth in the startup world. So this came about because people cared. We were willing to put in our time and energy. It's a nonprofit, so we need your help.
Right.
But we're doing it to make a difference. And Capital One certainly believes in the initiative. They care deeply about their own entrepreneurial efforts. And so they're putting their innovation team in the building. So we're going to take the first 3 floors of this building. Wow. The 4th floor is a kind of a shared UI, UX floor where their user team can work with our startups and help them for free. They get all these great services that help our founders grow. And the 5th floor is Capital One's own floor, private floor for their innovation team. And we had a little surprise, which I'll tell you all about. No media here, right? Okay. Capital One, God bless them. Anybody work for Capital One here? This group, Capital One is amazing. They do so much for this community. I had no idea to what level. But they have given us people and resources beyond belief. But when they got an interest in doing this or participating in this building, they said, we really like what y'all are doing because you're going to make a difference in our community and we want to help. We're not really sure what that looks like yet. And that went from, well, we'll help you in some fashion with people and maybe some resources to, well, we'll buy the building and we'll put our team in it and tell us what will make Richmond one of the best in the country. You guys have been to other places around town, Galvanize in Denver, been to the American Underground in Durham, I want to say Crayola Factory, but it's not that. The Startup Factory, there's another one in Austin, there's one in Boston, there's so many of them. The EC in Nashville. We've traveled to these places and seen what works really well and learned from them what also doesn't work. And we looked at their facilities. And so we had the opportunity to tell Capital One, here's what we think can really make a difference. And you're going to go, this sounds like off the charts. We said, we want a rooftop deck. Now, why does that matter? How can that matter?
That's all I'm asking.
It matters because the millennials expect creative zones. And a lot of that deals with being open and being able to move around and get inspired. So we said, we want a rooftop deck. And they said, well, how about we take that a step further? How about not just a rooftop deck, but a presentation space for lectures and pitches and other community activities that we can congregate people into this building so they can learn about what entrepreneurship and what startups and building companies is all about. We obviously said yes.
Right.
Sounds good.
Right.
And that's what they're building. So on the top floor of this 5-story building is a rooftop deck with a reception area and a huge presentation space. Presentation space. So we're really excited about that. And it is a community asset. This isn't Capital One. You're not going to have some big sign on the building that says Capital One. They're not doing that. It's really powerful. They are saying to us as citizens, we're here to help. And we're going to deploy our resources, and that's time and people and financial, to make a difference. And it's real, and it's big, and it's exciting, and we're going to be on the map right out of the gate. Stories will be written all over the country about this.
Awesome.
So it's really good.
Look forward to that. Good. So what do new businesses need to do that they're probably not doing right now?
That's a really open-ended question, Chris.
Oh, I know. Okay, what do I need to do that I'm probably not doing?
Well, one of the things that we've seen from startups, and was really surprising. I did not expect what I'm about to say. I didn't expect this to be the case. You get all these really, really smart people coming out of college, incredibly book smart, not necessarily street smart, but book smart. The one thing that they all are short on is pitching.
Oh, really?
All of them. Really surprising. So
what do you mean by pitching? Like, what about it?
creating pitch decks and
Okay.
being able to stand up and present against that pitch deck.
Okay.
They were just weak. Doesn't mean that they can't stand up and give presentations. We're talking about giving a presentation, building a pitch deck, and giving a presentation against that. Multiple kinds of pitch decks. We're all in sales,
Yeah.
so having a sales deck that you can present against,
Yeah.
but also having the ability to create a fundraising deck to raise capital off of. So that was a challenge. So how did we address that challenge? Startup Virginia exists today just in a temporary facility. The beauty of what we're doing, this is about people and programming. People and programming. One of those people aspects of it are mentors. Here's one of them right here. Eric's one of our mentors, which is great. He's also a professor at VCU. Mentors are driving real change in the startup community. And the founders who are willing to listen, they're the ones that are going to bubble up to the top every time.
You stressed willing to listen.
You bet.
Is that uncommon?
It is uncommon. Well, it's becoming more common.
Okay.
Right,
You
so
have to, right? If you're going to survive.
if they
you
want to
better listen.
survive,
Yeah.
right. I might come back to another story on that.
Okay.
So in that ability to listen, in that mentoring capability, people in programming are driving the ship. So we wanted to have an ongoing program where these mentors can actively engage and the founders can have access to them on a regular and recurring basis. So we're doing that. Yeah. Where do we take that and how do we leverage it even further? Mentors also have the opportunity to invest. Yeah. So this is really a kind of a three-legged stool. Startups will never get anywhere if we don't have founders, if we don't have mentors, and we don't have investors. All three of those need to be at the highest level possible for us to be successful at this. So it's kind of an odd way of getting back to the question, but at the end of the day, it's a three-legged stool. Any piece of that doesn't exist, it won't work. But we're going to make darn sure that it does work.
Right.
We have over 70 mentors today, and I've not asked one. This is the beauty to this. I've not asked one, hey, will you come be a mentor?
Oh, really?
They've all come to us and said, I want to help. I want to help. True? Yeah. That is a huge commitment and sends a great message to the rest of this community about what's possible. But to bring it full circle, one of those people said, hey, I want to help. I just retired out of Capital One. That's great. Come on down. Let's talk about it. He starts telling me the story of what he does or has been doing for the last 15 years. Capital One has a university out at West Creek. He's head of the Capital One pitch practice.
Oh, really? Wow, that's fantastic.
How ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I said, well, how about we take this to another level? I mean, you want to help one-on-one from a mentoring standpoint, but what if we can take this to a broader audience by putting on workshops with you and your pitch practice history? He's one of the best pitch guys in America, and he's one of our mentors.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we said, let's do a trial. So we put together a workshop. Sold out. There's no fee.
Sure.
No
But
fee.
you filled up.
Filled up
Yeah.
with our founders and some outside folks, because ultimately our program is not just about the founders in Startup Virginia. It's also about community opportunities, and we can talk further about that. It was fantastic. I learned a ton. I sat in there, you bet.
Sure.
It was great. It was really special. So people left that program and said, this is a game changer for me. Very structured, very organized. They came away knowing that the value proposition from Startup Virginia is real. And these are the kinds of programs that we're presenting to the community of founders and ultimately opening that up to others.
Wow, that's terrific. I've heard you talk about the future of employment in America. Why should we pay attention to that?
Yeah, 65% of the jobs in 2030 do not exist today. 65%. That's a scary number.
You know what's funny about that is that when you say that, it's like, well, now that you say it, you're right, right? I mean,
Well, I'm not saying I'm right.
Well, the statistic is right, though. I mean, if you look back, I mean, how many jobs today exist that did not exist, 5 or 10 years ago?
Correct.
Right?
And Dominion, Capital One, the banks, all the larger organizations will openly tell you they're not the future of employment.
Yeah.
That's not where the jobs are going to come from. So what are we going to do about it from a community standpoint? We've got to be self-creators of opportunity. And that's why this startup opportunity is so huge. And it has to work because we have to compete. And if we don't compete and we don't put these kinds of facilities and resources in place and tie them together beyond our own backyard, we don't tie them to others, we'll lose out. And we're not going to let that happen.
Good, good. What is passion, and how do you know if someone really has it?
Oh, that's a good question. This kind of gets back to, can you teach entrepreneurship? I think you can teach entrepreneurship from a thought process, but I don't think you can teach somebody to be necessarily an entrepreneur. I think there are certain innate skills that come from just how you grow through life that fit for being entrepreneurial. And one of them is being passionate. Do you have certain structural skills as you're growing through life to be that kind of a leader? It's a gut thing. Do you have that inner drive, that perseverance? I always like to ask people, did you play sports? Were you a captain of the sports team? I'm trying to look for different components when doing interviews. Sounds like a simple, basic question, but it can tell a lot about a person early on based on what they've been doing, and then you can drill down into questions related to that and see how they handle it. I'm a competitive person. Not to a fault, I don't think, but I am competitive. I like to win. Or maybe I don't like to lose. I'm not a sore loser. I've lost many times. I didn't get a baseball stadium.
Right.
I lost $1 million. And what the hell, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. But at the end of the day, I like to win.
Yeah.
And I like to surround myself with winners.
Yeah.
And I also believe in the word team. Today, more than ever, team building is critical in a corporate environment. People must work together and move forward together. And you're only as good as your weakest link. And so I'm a big believer that if you're not communicating and the team's not working together, you got to find out where that cog in the wheel is and fix it. And there are lots of ways to fix it, but the first thing you have to do is recognize it. Got to recognize it, and you have to address it. And it can be addressed in a positive way or a negative way. And I'd much rather go the positive way and try to solve a problem by leveraging people's strengths. I give talks on this in colleges all the time. Know your strengths and weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. I got tons of them. Way too many.
I got a lot myself.
Way more than strengths. But I'm not afraid to tell you about them.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I made sure in all of the companies I've been involved with to surround myself with people that took care of my weaknesses. I made absolutely sure of that.
Yeah, it's critical to know your weaknesses and then work on a plan for mitigating them however you need to. And lots of times it is surrounding yourself with people whose their strengths are your weaknesses.
Correct.
Right?
And what we're doing in Startup Virginia is part of the orientation process now. We're starting it in the new building. It's too difficult to do it where we are right now. And I'm really proud of this because no other incubator, surprisingly, in our research, no other incubators are doing this.
Wow.
Yeah. So what are we going to do about it? Orientation process is going to include a program that puts you through, in essence, your own, SWOT analysis.
Right.
We want you to, we want you to know who you are, because how else can you take somebody who's a founder and say, you know what, you need to be a leader? Well, what does that really mean? And are we expecting them to know what they don't know? They can't come into it per se. They might have certain traits. We talked about those.
Yep.
So let's give them the tools to educate them and advance them about themselves. And nobody else is doing that. I was really surprised at that. So
That's amazing.
we're doing it.
Oh, well, good, good. If you can believe it, we're starting to get a little low on time.
I don't want to leave.
I don't want you to leave. I wish we didn't have little time. But I have a list of what I call lightning round questions. Before we get
should
to
ask
those,
them.
we were going to ask their questions in just a moment. But before we do that, I do want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything else like about you or about Startup Virginia you just want to make sure that this audience knew about before we move on to this lightning round?
Just about me?
Yeah, or Startup Virginia. Anything? I want to make sure they walk away with this.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that I care about the community.
Yeah.
I've been involved in some larger scale projects that didn't work, but I think put in motion change. Change. Real quick, how many of you are from Richmond? You grew up here. The number keeps getting lower and lower.
Yeah.
I always ask that question because taking nothing away from the hands that were raised, but the ones who didn't raise your hand because you're not from here, you are driving change in Richmond. I didn't grow up here. I was born here. My family was from here, but I grew up in Newport News and Williamsburg. The people that have been on these teams, they didn't grow up here.
Yeah.
The two other founders that started Virginia, they didn't grow up here.
Yeah.
The team that was all about the anchor of the revitalization downtown, only one person was from here. The rest of the guys were not from here. And it's because you've been elsewhere, you've seen more, you want more, and you're driving more because you're getting involved. And that is changing Richmond for the better. Taking nothing away from the great things of Richmond's past.
Right.
But it is driving real change. So for me, I like to do things that make a difference. I worked for EDS for 1 year out of college. And I got this job out of my fraternity house.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother story. But the point behind it was the hardest thing I had to do, because I'm fiercely loyal, was to tell this senior VP, who's the one who plucked me out of that fraternity house and said, I want you to come work for me because for whatever reason, he liked whatever I had to offer in those conversations, which is all about engaging people older than you and staying actively involved as a student. So I like to create change, and I couldn't do that at EDS because I was not former military, and most of their leadership was former military.
Really?
And I could stay there for 20 years, and I probably could create change. But that didn't fit my personality. So again, knowing yourself. And so what I knew about myself was that was not going to work. I needed more. And so the hardest thing I had to do was walk into his office. It took me 3 days.
Really?
Walk into his office and tell Ed I was going to leave.
Wow.
And you know what was great about that? When I told him what I was going to do, he jumped up out of that chair and gave me a big hug and said, go get him.
Oh my gosh.
He loved it.
Wow.
He loved it.
That's a leader right there.
Yeah.
The fact that you responded that way.
Well, he helped kickstart my career and helped me make a big decision.
Yeah.
You know, I fought a fear.
Yeah.
You know, I had to meet it head on. It just took a little longer than it does today. I don't wait 3 days for any of that anymore.
Good.
So, and the only takeaway really is, you know, I think you have to put yourself out there and you have to be willing to get knocked down. And I'm certainly not afraid to do that. And sometimes you win, sometimes you don't.
Right.
But along the way, if others see that and can grab a hold of that and helps drive other change for them, then we're all changing together, hopefully in a positive way. And I'm very confident. In fact, I'm 100% confident that the only reason minor league baseball is here today is because of the effort that we made. I mean, I know that for a fact.
Really? That's great.
And that was important to me
Yeah.
because my grandfather did that, and I wasn't about to let it go away on my watch.
Wow. All right, so let's get to a couple lightning round questions.
All right.
So,
Got a beer?
There's probably one in the back we can get you. What book has had the most influence on you and why?
Yeah, Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner.
Wow. Sounds like someone else may have heard of that book before.
You heard it? You know that book? Yeah. You know when I read it? Summer reading in high school.
Really?
And I haven't forgotten it. There's something about that book that stuck with me. Lately, I love The Outliers. It's a great book.
I listened to that book on tape, actually. That's a great story.
Great book.
Multiple stories.
Brad Fell has a book out called Startup Communities. And it is, in essence, the Bible of how communities should look at themselves and what they should do and they shouldn't do based on 20 plus years of experience. He created Galvanize in Boulder. He changed Boulder as a community from the crunchiness that it has to this very, very vibrant entrepreneurial world. And so when I read that book, and it was really powerful from what we were doing here and how many things we were doing right and the things we were doing wrong. So it's been a great book for somebody who's doing what I'm doing.
Good. Thank you for that. I'll have to write that one down. Oh, I did write it down, actually. What is the best advice you'd ever received, or maybe advice you've given to others?
Yeah, really simple, very direct. Learn how to listen.
That's good.
Learn how to listen.
Everybody write that one down.
And big difference between hearing and listening.
It is.
Big
My wife will
difference.
tell me that. What's the worst advice you've ever gotten?
Gotten or given?
Well, either one.
Worst advice I've ever gotten. You can't do that.
Oh, that's a good one. That is really good.
I don't like that sentence.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for me.
Okay. Ooh, that may be tweetable right there. What does it mean for a leader to be authentic?
Man, you're tying it all back to your gig here. I love this. This is good.
Would you recommend that?
I like this.
Thanks for calling that out, by the way.
When we got together before, we did this for hours. We were laughing so much, having a great time. So this is, I love sitting down with you. It's good. Well, I think it's really a great name. I think Authentic Leader is a perfect name because what matters in today's world is truly being honest, direct. We don't have time to drag things out. I mean, that's what governments do. And it gets everybody in trouble. So I'm not a fan of that. So being authentic is, I thought that name was perfect. When I first heard it, I'm like, damn, that is a really, really great name.
Thanks.
I really liked it. So for me personally, it's the things I've been talking about today. I think you have to be the change.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to do that, and you got to be authentic and not egotistical about it. Certainly you have your convictions. You believe in what you believe, but if somebody has another perspective, you should listen to it because it could change your own perspective. And that's been a great lesson for me, and part of that learning to listen, which goes into sales and other things. I believe your customers will tell you everything if you're willing to listen.
What did you think of that video? That was a lot of fun. I know the people in the audience had a great time. You could probably hear some of the laughter happening during the interview. Some of the key takeaways that I took from this is that 7 years is not too long to find your niche, and how one client can help you actually discover a new product line. Go back if you didn't hear that part. That's a really interesting story. Also, great learning from working through the 2008 recession, the things that Bryan had to go through at that time when he owned Smartbox, and really the importance of treating your franchisees as partners, really anybody you're working with. But I just love the story about how he specifically saw his franchisees as partners when that's not necessarily all the case in franchises. Also, the stress on the importance of communication and honesty, especially during very difficult times in your organization. Another takeaway I took was I found it interesting that Richmond is the #2 millennial growth city in America. So if you're a millennial, and I know a lot of millennials don't like to be labeled that, but if you're in that age group and you're not in Richmond, it might be worth checking out. Now, I have had a tour of the 1717 Innovation Center, as I mentioned earlier. It really, truly is a beautiful and cutting edge facility. The rooftop deck is out of this world. The view from there is amazing, and the deck itself is amazingly multi-purpose. You got to check that out too. Bryan also talked about the importance of building and delivering an effective pitch deck. I would say that that is for any business owner or really anyone who is selling anything at all. And the key to success is being willing to listen. It's kind of a frame of mind that you have when you are willing to listen, really to the advice of others. He mentioned the two books, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. We'll provide a link at the bottom. Another book he mentioned was Outliers. I've actually read that book. It's a tremendous book if you've not read that. Some of the worst advice that Bryan received is that you can't do that. I think that really speaks to an entrepreneurial spirit. Anyone who is starting their own business or is an entrepreneur themselves, I'm sure, have heard that terrible advice that you can't do it, which sometimes can really create drive to show that you can do it. And then, of course, I love what Bryan said about being an authentic leader. That was a fun part. He's truly called me out as I was asking that question. But I appreciate his perspective about what it means to be an authentic leader. What were your key takeaways? Do you agree with the takeaways that I took from this interview? What were some additional takeaways that maybe I didn't mention here? Please add them in the comments below.